I think it's about 3% of the world population are living in countries where fertility is not declining. So the idea that, the population is growing is very old news. Immigrants get old, immigrants stop having kids as well. It's the same type of thing. You're just getting in essentially a new dependent class because, they're not going. They usually have, maybe more children than the typical, Westerner for maybe 1 or 2 generations, but it declines already fairly steep once they get here. Are we going to get off the pill? Are we going to, get off of the Industrial Revolution? Yeah, it's the toothpaste meets tube type situation.
Yeah. I don't want people to end up in that position where that realization comes that late. And there's maybe not a huge amount you can do about it. And I think that's tragic, actually.
Our brilliant guest today is returning to the show. She is a writer and the host of the Subversive podcast. Alex Kaschuta, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me.
And as we said, we're on location in London, which is why we are more fancily dressed than normal. And the set is what the set is. Yeah. But anyway, welcome to London. It's great to have you back on. I've been following your writing and the things you say on social media with great interest. You just spoke at the NatCon conference where we are as neutral media, of course we are. What are you thinking about right now? What is sort of piquing your curiosity? What is interesting to you at the moment?
Well, I think the main theme of the conference seems to be the fertility crisis.
You're doing your job.
Yeah, I'm doing my part. I've been actually praised for my pregnant lady outfits when I came in here. Thank you. I've worked a lot of them because, you need pregnant lady outfits. I've learned. So I think this has been kind of in the ether. It's also been on my mind. I was thinking about actually speaking on this topic, but I'm kind of glad I didn't because it seems to be very well covered. It definitely would have brought something really redundant to the theme. And it seems to also be very spicy in the UK context because I've been looking at, how have people reacted and, even like the insinuation that, mother and father type of combo should be normative in society seems to have sparked pretty much insanity in the UK media. And the idea that, the fertility crisis seems to be tied into the idea that, the only way to solve this is some form of coercion. And this is what, the fascists at NatCon want you to do. And it's...
Make the women have the babies. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think that's... But before we get into that, a lot of people who are really not familiar with any of these conversations will be thinking, what fertility crisis? We've got a population problem. Population is going to boom. Everyone's going to die of climate change, etc. Yeah. So what is the fertility crisis?
I don't think that's the case. I mean, at least in terms of kind of the newer data that we have is that I think it's about 3% of the world population are living in countries where fertility is not declining. So the idea that, the population is growing is very old news. The population is falling pretty much everywhere. And it's not falling in the sense of, you can't feel it in the water right now. If you go out on the street, plenty of people there, you might see more elderly people slowly, but it's not something that's like an urgent problem. But the fact that, the population pyramids in pretty much every region are reversing, and you have many more older people than younger people, is something that can have extreme knock-on type domino effect consequences that people are just starting to model and starting to realize. I mean, it's predicted that a country like South Korea, which has abysmal birth rates, they've fallen under one child per couple, like the TFR is like 0.9 something. They're essentially going to die out. So this is kind of, we're watching the last South Koreans slowly kind of march onto their graves if this trend continues. And they're not going to die out in 500 years. This is pretty much in about 100 to 150 years. You'll see the last South Koreans say goodbye to them. And, this is only just like a startling example, but the same trend line applies to pretty much everywhere in the West, with very few exceptions. I mean, consistently over replacement fertility rates you have in places like Israel and the Amish community, in Mormon communities in the US, but even they are just about at replacement and probably going to fall under replacement very soon. So this is a form of, essentially what people are trying to do now is to identify what exactly causes this. And overall, there are many factors that can go into it. There's, environmental factors, even kind of xenoestrogens in the water, things that might affect, we've heard about declining testosterone, fertility issues for younger and younger women, the fact that most people who want to have children after a certain age need IVF. There's all sorts of factors going into it, but I think the conclusion that a lot of people at NatCon arrived at, and it's one that I have as well, is that the main factors are essentially cultural. Like we've really, once children became optional, we've really kind of lost the will to have them in the sense, because they are really a burden in a way. And I think people can, they can't really model their lives with children, but they know how they feel right now. And they know that, okay, sleepless nights, cost of daycare, I'm renting, I don't want to have that hassle, all these things. It's just not worth it to a lot of people.
Is it really cultural though? Because look, the housing crisis is a UK very specific problem, but that's part of it. But just more broadly, urbanization means, Peter Zahan, who we've had on the show and talked about this, when you live on a farm, kids are free labor. When you live in the city, they're like an expensive pet.
Of course, yeah.
Right? So
it's fun, mate.
Yeah.
It depends what you do.
I mean, one can argue that, urbanization is something that's kind of tied into culture as well. I mean, the incentives for urbanization are kind of mimetic as well. It's not like, okay, it's not just people chasing money, but it's, it's a culture that forms after the Industrial Revolution as well. People kind of gathered in urban centers to work on the factories, and a certain kind of culture emerged around that. And then a fertility rate dropped to the level of that culture of people, being together in that environment. So I think what we've reached now is the point where kind of a lot of these memes converged, and for the life that the typical individual leads in these cities, it doesn't make logical sense to have children, and
And as well, governments aren't really doing anything to incentivize people either. I mean, the Hungarian government does, to be fair to them.
Yeah.
But certainly the British government, you look at...
It's a tough one, yeah.
You look at what they're doing, you think, well, they're just exacerbating the problem, aren't they?
Yes, in a way they are, but if you look at places that had incentives for raising the birth rate, it is marginally productive. Even the places who've imposed kind of significant incentives like Hungary, it kind of works. I think they've bumped it up by 0.2 or 0.3 after massive cultural programs and all of that. But yeah, the trend line still, they're really fighting an uphill battle. It seems to be very hard to lift. I think the only country who's actually gotten it back from below replacement to above replacement is Georgia, because they've been, I think the local patriarch, people are very religious in Georgia, baptizes every third or fourth child that a family has. So like big families are incentivized to get to the special ceremony to meet the patriarch and have their child baptized by him. So yeah, I think a strange exotic type of incentive that I don't necessarily know would work here. I don't know if the Archbishop of Canterbury would pump people up to have lots of kids, but. Yeah, I mean, the housing crisis, I think, is really an important thing as well. But if I think back at all of the squalor and struggle that my ancestors went through, and just the material conditions that they had children in, I don't think the fact that they rented and didn't own was a big problem for them, or the cost. They had different social technologies around them as well, like they had family, they had support networks, and all of that. But it was also culturally the thing that you did, and it was not really optional in the sense that you would, if you didn't do this, you were probably going to be stigmatized, or you would feel bad about yourself if you were a spinster, or you didn't, participate in growing the clan and all the traditions that tied into that. And when you had the Industrial Revolution, and all the things that kind of came with it. The family just didn't work the same way. People moved away for work. They preferred to live alone because, family's wonderful, but it's also kind of a hassle. And if you can help it, you'd probably move away from your in-laws, and most people did. So it's also the abundance that the Industrial Revolution and all the technologies coming with it created that allowed us to atomize ourselves, because like in economics, it is a revealed preference. People like to, mind their own business. It's like we were talking before this. Community is something beautiful, but it's for when other people do it, it's much nicer. Other people really need community. I'm kind of a loner myself.
But we're also ignoring the elephant in the room, which is the pill.
Yeah. I think the pill is a major factor in there. The thing is, birth rates were falling before the pill as well, so it's kind of a trend that was already in motion, and the pill was definitely not a decelerant. It really kind of helped to stoke the fires of a trend that was already in motion.
So it's not the pill, or the pill may have contributed, let's say.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the cultural developments that are a product of urbanization, whatever, so what's going on, Alex? Because there's part of me that thinks that when we delve into this issue, we're going to find a lot of things we don't like pretty quickly in terms of, the correlation between prosperity and the number of children people have. Do we need to be poorer so that we start reproducing? Is it about women's liberation? Have we liberated women too far? Like, that would be a question some people ask. I'm not saying I'm asking it, but people will start to ask all of these questions. I've been talking to a lot of people at the conference about it, like Louise Perry. She's like, it's all about prosperity. You talk to Eric Kaufman, he'll say, well, it's about religion, and he's not religious, but religious communities reproduce and non-religious basically don't. Like, where do you see the crucial piece of this?
Yeah, I think it's, unfortunately, it's hard to kind of delineate which particular ingredient in this, because these are all kind of factors that accentuate each other, and it's hard to say what the first domino was when, you're like 100 dominoes down the line.
Yeah.
So I think, in a way, the education of women was a big thing. It kind of freed women from marriages that were not necessarily of convenience, but in the sense that, you really were dependent in many ways for men for protection and for financial support, which, not saying anything about the quality of those marriages. A lot of marriages, are arranged or maybe coerced a little bit in the beginning, and people end up having a really good marriage. So not saying that that's a bad thing, but the fact that people did have a lot more options, like in the case of having children as well, I think led to a decline in marriage rates, and then, and the revealed preference of not having to deal with each other is bullshit.
And so the inevitable question is, if we are to address this problem, what do we do?
Yeah, it's like kind of a Pandora's box type situation. Putting the toothpaste back in the tube. It's a tough one. I mean, I feel like obviously what I'm part of and what I'm trying to do is kind of more of a, incentivizing people culturally to, adopt this meme of pronatalism. Because, I mean, I can be only a testimonial of one. It's been really a miraculous thing for my life, and I know for my husband as well. I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but yeah, I can, because, he's very happy being a dad. And the people that I know around me are also, completely enamored by their children. There's also, the downside is of building this up too much, because obviously there are downsides. I think there's also kind of a very trad movement now that it's like, this is going to solve all your psychoses, all your problems are gonna be solved by having children. It's all upside. Obviously, it's not. I mean, people have the instinct that this is going to derail their lives, and they're very, very right. It's going to completely restructure the way you relate to yourself, to your partner, to your life, to what your priorities are. But for most people, this is a good thing. I really think so, because a lot of the problems that people have psychologically with kind of the burden of modernity is this aimlessness of, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? There's no guardrails. It's all about you self-creating, building this unique, snowflake type thing that only you represent, finding your authenticity, going to whatever silent retreats and meditating on what it is to be alive and stuff like that. And I've personally found by doing this stuff, it feels like it's kind of an eternal circle. You're kind of always back to square one. And it's like, whenever you think you've had this major epiphany that you've kind of fought yourself out of your thinking process, you're back in the shit.
Do you think part of the problem as well is that we are accustomed to living a life where our own pleasure is the main thing?
Yeah, I think that is part of the problem. It's a hard problem to solve because that's kind of the most immediate thing that you want to do because in a way we're at base we're all animals and you want to scratch an itch and eat the candy and do all that stuff. Plus, there are so many ways to scratch so many itches that you didn't even know you had and probably didn't have until yesterday when you saw, people are having this itch online. Maybe I should scratch it. So I think that's something that people underestimate, like the mimetic power of a lot of the stuff that comes in from the internet. I mean, the kind of more benign way is that some company convinces you to buy shoes off of the internet. The more kind of vicious way is that, your 14-year-old's convinced to chop off her breasts because she saw, 500 TikTok videos of people saying, this is really satisfying, do it. So, I mean, it is a very strange new world. And it is, kind of all about this, because we don't have a structure to fit into, to say, okay, what is life? Life is you wake up, you go feed the animals, you have this responsibility, this fills up your entire day, and then you go to bed and you say your prayer and you report to this authority and you're kind of inbuilt into the system. And everyone else believes the same thing because obviously this is what you believe. I think, since time immemorial, we had something like that. Now we don't have anything like that, and people are told, okay, it's time for you to make up on the fly whatever you think that thing is, And I don't think most people, probably very few people, are equipped to actually do that, to create their own authenticity from scratch. And then they fall prey to a lot of this stuff that's just like out there in the ether. And a lot of this stuff is really predatory, like, whatever, slot machine gambling now. It's like, slot machines used to be really bad in like even the 80s, but nowadays they have essentially the same logic inbuilt like Candy Crush. And you have people just like sitting in front of the slot machines, peeing on themselves after 3 days and, like dying of dehydration because this stuff is just so powerful. And we're really not equipped to deal with it. And yeah, like I said, not just the slot machines, like everything is like that now. And, the free market idea is that, there is a need, the market's feeling a need. These people have a need to, die of dehydration in front of a slot machine because they keep doing it. They keep pulling the lever. Free will, they're consenting to do it. So, I think a lot of our environment is set up like that. And, maybe this trad stuff and, kind of back to the land, all this stuff is kind of a bit of a backlash against that. I don't necessarily think it's all, super wise. And I think a lot of people, I hear stories of, like 19 and 20-year-olds now getting married just in being afraid of all this stuff that we're talking about, the predation that they see around them. And then they get really kind of disillusioned by the fact that, marrying some random 19-year-old who thinks that, the West has fallen off the internet is not like an idyllic way of living, and it's not really like, in the pictures of you walking through a wheat field with your babies and stuff. So yeah, we're definitely at a sort of kind of metaphysical crossroads and how we relate to ourselves and in the West in general. And people feel like they've lost a lot, but we're still kind of fumbling in the dark about what to do about it.
And one of the interesting things that has risen with this whole natalism conversation is the rise of surrogacy. Now you look at it on the surface, you go, okay, this is good. People who can't have kids can have kids. What's wrong with that? And then you look into it and you go, oh, this is dark.
Yeah. It's a strange thing because obviously the more kind of napkin presentation of the case for surrogacy is really nice. You have women who maybe are not of great means, but are willing to do it for kind of generously to help someone who maybe is infertile and they really want their own child and this is the only way they can have it. It's really it kind of pulls on the heartstrings, especially if you're someone who knows are infertile yourself or it's tough out there. Like I said, a lot of people are having trouble with this. And it feels like, oh, you scratch my back, I scratch yours type of situation. But I think the case for it, or against it in a way, is kind of a case of like virtue ethics. It's like if we allow this type of activity to start, and if we allow this little edge case where it's obviously virtuous and nice, the thing is not going to stay there. We have slippery slopes are all around us, and we've been slipping on so many. And at this point, where I think surrogacy, especially commercial surrogacy and cross-border commercial surrogacy, is already a little bit of a strange beast because, especially now with the war in Ukraine, there's kind of a lot of the uncovered was essentially that a lot of people who were evacuating were these kind of like Big Brother style houses of women who, were living kind of in a cluster home, I don't know, pregnant with some Westerners baby, and they were kind of being kept in sort of, observation, so that the moms and dads or whoever was ordering the baby from abroad was kept in check of how the ladies were doing and stuff like that. So I don't know, it was, you could see this, we're still at the beginning of this, and this is already kind of, it feels a little bit predatory, and it feels a bit predatory to interrupt and just completely like commercially sever the bond between mom and baby. I mean, I've had a baby. I'm going to have one again very soon, and it's the idea that in the hospital. Even though if I signed the contract before, obviously I consented to this previously without knowing how I'd feel when the baby arrived. I would just have to give the baby just hand it over and say sayonara. I'm going to go home now. So yeah, there's also a lot of physical cost involved. It's recovering from pregnancy is not always easy. There's risks risks that are really hard to calculate in advance as well in terms of the impact on your health. Some women end up having like stress fractures, uterine ruptures, all sorts of things that just happen in the course of being pregnant. Might lead to infertility for themselves afterwards. So yeah, I mean, obviously, if someone's more of a libertarian bent, they say, okay, you put this in the disclaimer, put it in the contract. Obviously, let them know that this, side effects might include this, this, and this. But I think when it comes to something so profound as the bond between child and mother, I don't think your body knows that, oh, this is someone else's egg, and this is some, third-party sperm, and it's a different situation. But yeah, it just feels like, one of those slopes that, you can tell when you reach the precipice that it's like this is the direction it's going into, and we're just about there, and we're taking the first step down the slope, and it's, the darkness at the bottom is essentially, people ordering babies for anything. Yeah.
Well, it comes back to the point you were making about the market. It's like, what is the commodity that's being traded in that exchange? And it starts to get a little bit creepy very quickly. And as Francis says, once you look into it, then it sort of starts to make sense a little bit. But I want to come back to what can be done about it, because I was chatting to a bunch of young women at the conference, and I actually did something I don't usually do, which is I just stood back and listened for a long time. And there's a kind of different set of perspectives on this, because there are some people who go, well, we got to put the message out there and whatever. And there are other people who I think quite rightly say, well, look, like a guy on stage telling me a bunch of statistics about when I'm supposed to get pregnant by isn't really going to persuade me to do it. And I did, since I've had my son a year ago, I've been putting out like wholesome thirst traps on the internet about like, this is how fun it is, this is how much I'm enjoying, here's a cute photo, whatever, even though I'm going to stop doing that. What is the way to just it's not about persuading people into doing stuff, it's just like letting them know that option that we talked about has all these benefits that you might not see because you're living in a big city. None of your friends have kids. One of them was saying, I didn't hold my first baby until I was 30, which to me, and probably to you being Eastern European, you're like, what?
No, that was the case for me as well.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, I didn't have siblings or
I was like totally surrounded by babies my whole childhood.
That's pretty normal in Eastern Europe. Yeah. I'm just a bit of a freak. So don't worry.
So what do you think is some of what is the best way to communicate about this issue, in your opinion?
I think there's kind of a two-pronged thing. I agree that the young ladies won't necessarily be convinced by, a graph. Here, look at the graph. It's real bad if you don't pop them out tomorrow.
Yeah.
I don't think that's good. And I do think kind of your approach of thirst trapping is probably more suitable to how to do it. I think people seeing high status people that they look up to, people that they want to emulate, doing these things and presenting it like I said, in a bit of a realistic manner, because you can also have the overshot where it's just all just wheat fields and women surrounded by 7 babies, real thin with their wonderful blonde hair flowing in the wind. That happens, but it's rarely the case. It's usually a bit more hectic if you have 7 babies. You're not all chill all the time and all this type of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of.
I'll stop posting his photos and I'll just start posting his nappies and like the kitchen table after he's done throwing stuff everywhere.
Yeah, I think if you put like 5 adorable thirst traps of wonderful things, just throw a dirty nappy in there occasionally, just to remind people that there's a bit of a downside in there as well.
Hey KK, do you like trigonometry?
Of course I do. Incredible interviews, fascinating guests, phenomenal live shows, and hilarious raw streams.
In that case, you need to join our locals, so you can have access to even more brilliant content.
That's right, you get the chance to win incredible prizes, ask our phenomenal guests your questions, access extra content, and now the only place to watch our Raws on catch up is on Locals.
Our Raw shows still go out at 7 p.m. UK time, 2 p.m. Eastern as normal. But if you want to watch them after this time, then you're going to need to sign up to our Locals.
Raws have now become too spicy to stay on YouTube, so they're only available to watch back on our Locals page.
All you need to do to sign up is click on the link below this video, and for just $7 a month, you have access to all of this brilliant content.
$7 a month, even for someone of my persuasion, that's a bargain. See you all on Locals.
And the reason I feel really strongly about this is, I don't know if I've told this in public before, but I did this discussion at Unheard a few months back, and Freddie Sayers, who hosts it, he said to me, he said, there's something different about you since you became a father. There's something different. And I went, well, yeah, the future is not an abstraction anymore. Mm-hmm. It has a face and it has a name. Which I hadn't thought about before, but that's what came to me in the moment. And then as we were standing outside, I'd broken all my post-father promises and bummed a cigarette off Freddie, and him and I were standing there smoking. And this couple walked out of the club. And the woman came over to me and she was like, oh, I'm so glad you said that. You really changed the way I think about it. I'm really... Blah, blah, blah. And she was like, you could tell she was really inspired. Mm-hmm. And she was like, oh, we're going to have children now. I was like, oh, right now, we'll go for it. But then we were talking a little bit more, and I went, how old are you? And she went, I'm 43.
I mean, it could still happen.
It could, but probably not.
Yeah.
And I felt that was a kind of sign to me that I shouldn't keep quiet about it, because I don't want people to end up in that position where that realization comes that late and there's maybe not a huge amount you can do about it. And I think that's tragic, actually. And I think a whole slew of people from our generation, we're both 40, if you're a woman our age and you haven't, you're in trouble, right? So this is a really serious issue, not just like for the survival of South Korea, but like for people's sense of fulfillment and well-being and happiness and all of that. And increasingly, I meet and hear from a lot of people who are in that position. So it's a really important issue. But as we talked about, the top-down, do this is what, all of that isn't going to work. So other than you and I thirst-trapping people online, what else can be done culturally about this if it's a cultural issue?
Yeah, I think, the kind of the policy wonk type stuff, I think, should be done, not necessarily because each individual policy does something, but because it signals that this is a kind of a priority of the state, and I think it should be, because very few things are as serious and as imminent. I think the problem that we have with the kind of democratic politics is that people think in like 4 or 5 year cycles, and it's like, okay, what's burning now? And these things, like this is like generational, multi-generational issues, and it's very hard to bake in kind of a long-term view, because what's the return going to be on whatever politicians' priorities for the next 5 years. So I think that's a challenge. But given the fact that a lot of people really are are having this problem. And the fact that this is like the main theme of this conference is not just because it's filled with, weird like Westminster wonks, because it isn't. It's filled with a lot of people who maybe have gone through, trying to have children, or have got into some issues with it. We're talking about housing, we're talking about all this stuff, and they're trying to solve these issues. And I think this is symptomatic of a change in the culture as well. I mean, you didn't hear about this 5 years ago, though it was already kind of a problem. In the South Korea sense, it was already kind of an issue. But now it's an issue as well, because I feel maybe people from the millennial generation or so are starting to feel the burn of this as well. Like they're seeing people in their cohort either trying to have children, not managing to have children, or having pretty kind of depressing lives. Trying to keep going to the clubs with their wrinkly whatever, and it's not a satisfying thing. So I think it might have a chance to just be picked up, and through a myriad of thirst traps from influential people such as yourselves, I think it's going to,
Because also as well, it leads to the problem of mass immigration, where we have a labour shortage in this country, and the only way to fill it is to get people from overseas, and that creates its own problems.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is again the 5-year cycle. It's like, for the next 5 years, this is extremely good at you're going to patch the problem, but immigrants get old. Immigrants stop having kids as well. It's the same type of thing. You're just getting in essentially a new dependent class, because they're not going. They usually have maybe more children than the typical Westerner for maybe 1 or 2 generations, but the decline's already fairly steep once they get here, because of urbanization, because of the incentives of living in the space, because of the fact that obviously their children will be educated. They want them to come here to be educated. The girls will be educated. They have other aspirations for their lives, and then. Even if they're in a bit more of a traditional context, the memes of modernity are flooding in. The pill, maybe they didn't have the pill back in Afghanistan, and definitely have it here. And what is high status in the culture is not, being the trad wife or whatever, having lots of kids. It is, participating in all the self-creating, cool authenticity stuff that we discussed before. I think that's.
But it also leads to problems within a nation, because the lack of cohesiveness within the nation, people from different cultures mean that it's not as homogenous as it once was. That leads to problems of national identity. So,
of course, yeah.
There's the flip side to mass immigration as well.
Oh, of course.
I don't think you need to convince that.
No, definitely. There are many issues with mass immigration. Like I said, for fertility, I would say yes, it's kind of a bit of a patch in the short term, but in terms of kind of what it does to national cohesion, and this is kind of like very vague terminology. That's why people attack it. It's like, what does cohesion even mean? Well, if you go to Bradford, you see what cohesion means. If you go to places where cohesion's broken down, you can. I know it when I see it type things. A lot of kind of modern politics is about kind of the rule of experts. Bring your own spreadsheets, bring your own graphs and type of stuff. And I feel like a lot of the problems that you have with mass immigration is just kind of the silent disenfranchisement of people who used to live here. It's like this whole like white flight type discussion, people just kind of slowly moving out. It's hard sometimes to quantify, or people don't really want to quantify it, because it's not a favorable statistic to the incentive structure that the people in politics want to build. So it just you just wake up one day and Bradford is majority, I don't know exactly, Bangladesh, Pakistani, something like that, and people might say, oh, just the way the cookie crumbles is fine, whatever, but it's not just that. You obviously have the grooming gang crisis, scandal, whatever, just like this pervasive insanity that happened with the majority Pakistani grooming gangs. And also because there's kind of a silencing on this, and people don't really want to rock the boat, they don't want to be anti-immigration and things like that. These things tend to escalate to a point where it's really unsustainable, and this stuff doesn't make it into the GDP calculation. It just overall GDP is growing. It doesn't matter what Bradford looks like. It doesn't matter if that girls are tortured in Telford or something like that. GDP line goes up. That's what most of the policy wonks care about. So that's kind of what's going to flow into the statistics. That's what the experts are going to care about. But yeah, and I think like that's a lot of the stuff that's kind of low status and so right-wing politics and things like that is based on things that are nakedly visible to the eye, that are obviously painful for people experiencing them, but that somehow don't make it into the statistics.
It's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because you're one of the people that I see talking about status a lot, high status, low status, and I think Ed West talks about this quite a bit as well. It's a very interesting way of looking at why some ideas are popular and others not, because I think it's tempting, particularly if you're like us, you care about truth. It's sort of tempting to think, well, if something's right, then other people are gonna. But that's kind of not really the way we think about these things, is it?
Yeah, I think status is a really important variable that a lot of people overlook, because people tend to think that the world operates on truth claims. Okay, if something's more science-based, if something's more kind of knowledge-based than something else, it will somehow, for some mechanism, win out in the end. But in reality, kind of the way power works and the way ideas become influential is who exactly holds these ideas. How do they propagate the fact that they hold them? Who is influenced by them? And it's kind of we hear that the argument from authority is a fallacy, but it's pretty much how arguments work. And even you, like, for example, if you want to inform yourself about whatever kind of strange topic that you don't know much about, you go to X expert and see, okay, what is the consensus in the field? Maybe you listen to one or two speakers or something, and then you, from authority, take that guy's word for it. And now, because we have so many domains, pretty much every domain of life is a domain of expertise, and that's kind of what we believe in. The argument from authority is pretty much what we all believe. And then status in every field is how kind of that authority is conveyed, okay? Mm-hmm. And so you have that in...
Pandemic was a good example of this. And actually, whichever side of the argument you come down on, now this is what I was going to ask you about, because now I feel that so many of the issues that we're talking about are a product of social media, because social media gives status to ideas that aren't true but sound good, and punishes ideas that are true but don't sound good, I think, in a way that even discussion in the mainstream media doesn't even reach that level. Like, the level of derangement on many things on social media is amplified by the fact that it really rewards things that sound nice and therefore high status versus things that don't. Do you think that's a big part of it, the social media entering into the fray, and that's one of the reasons that there's such a separation now as well?
Yeah, I think the social media kind of exacerbates what is already present in human nature. Yeah, I think if you were in like a little band of people in your village, you had kind of the same instincts of, okay, I'm going to trust a high status guy, and I'm going to think this guy's a loser because he's sends whatever loser signals, and I'm not going to believe his religion. I'm going to believe this guy's religion, and that's kind of what you have on social media. I mean, whoever you follow, they're the influencers, and you're going to kind of side with them, even if they make some crazy statements. Because an interesting thing that I've noticed about even like political social media is that the clustering of positions is sometimes not very coherent. Like, you had, for example, with COVID at the beginning, the most intensely lockdown, pro-masking, were people on the fringe right, because they were kind of early on this. There's a lot of them in Asia for some reason, and they were really kind of, on the barricades and learning about this and telling people where to get their masks and stuff. And then it kind of flipped when it became a little bit more mainstream. People, at first it was all about hugging your friends in Chinatown and stuff like that in the mainstream. And then it flipped. It was all, this is the end of the world. We need to lock down. And you could see the kind of the status hierarchies like solidifying in real time, because it wasn't clear exactly what the position was at first, but then it was clear, okay, my people believe this. We believe, vaccines are holy, we need the masks, we need the lockdowns, it's all good. If you're against this, you're a part of this other tribe. And obviously, there's also an incentive for the other tribe to say, oh, really? Well, then, yes, exactly. Yes, I am the anti-masking people, I am the anti-vaccine people. And it does lead to, definitely more derangement in terms of like people holding on to positions really strongly than you'd have in, you know, the village with the loser guy and the high status Chad telling you what religion to follow. So yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of kind of mechanics built into the internet that, like the slot machines, we're not used to, like social escalations that we're not used to dealing with in real life. We're not built for that scale of, I don't know, exacerbation of ideas.
And is the answer to get off the internet? Just sorry.
Yeah, sorry, go.
Is that the only answer? Because I don't think we are going to get off the internet.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Like, to be honest, with all these technologies, like, you know, are we going to get off the pill? Are we going to, you know, get off of the Industrial Revolution? Yeah, you know, it's the toothpaste meets tube type situation, because we need it. I mean, you know, we both make our living off broadcasting on the internet. You know, I want to read the comments, see what people are talking about. I want to see who the guests are. I'm kind of stuck in it in a way. And I feel like just personally, I'm trying to kind of moderate my use of it, you know, trying to be, try to be very paternalistic with myself and how I use it, because no one else is going to be. But I can see how, you know, how much of a downward spiral it can be for other people who, you know, for some reason or another, maybe don't have, you know, good self-control. Not that I have extremely good self-control, but, you know, I'm really, you know, doing my best to do this. But yeah, it's, you know, it's another thing that is and can be predatory if it's not put to good use. And I think this is kind of a dynamic that you see a lot nowadays in terms of, you know, the space we're in with all these technologies and all this stuff that's really changed in the last few hundred years is really good and gives like insane returns to a very small percent of people. You see this everywhere from dating markets, from the economy. You know, there are a few people who are very well placed in terms of being like very high IQ, high conscientiousness, low neuroticism type people who can just take this stuff and just like plug into it like robotically and just, you know, make the most money, you know, get the best partner, things like that. And then that works out for them. But because it is such there's so many wild cards here, for the other people, this is essentially like predatory. The fact that this is all just like completely, you know, very like, you know, build your own adventure, non-paternalistic, we don't judge type stuff. But it is really, it's quite aggressive for the people who are just not equipped to deal with it. So, you know, we've kind of built our society around the idea that, you know, freedom is perfect. It's really good. But I think there are gradations of how much any individual person can consent to this stuff, both in the sense that the stuff is getting more predatory by the year, like every year, the stuff, you know, with A/B testing, like everything's more refined. And I feel like a lot of people who are at the top, you know, tend to be very libertarian about this. It's all fine. But I feel like there's, it's coming for you. Like you're not, you know, you might say you're going to plug into the AI and become like a Superman, but you're not a Superman yet. You know, even with your high IQ type stuff, it'll get you. Like one of these traps will get you eventually. And, you know, it's, you know, for now it's okay that it's just kind of like consuming the plebs and whatever. But it's coming. It's coming to a theater near you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think what people fail to realise with social media is that it is dementing. And that we like to think that we're immune. I certainly did until, you know, one day you end up losing your head and just getting drawn into an argument, and before you know it, it was 7 o'clock in the morning, you're looking out and the sun is setting and you've spent however long, you know, saying things that you deeply regret.
Yes, we've all been there, haven't we? Yes, I mean, that's one of my rules on the internet is to not engage in beefs. And one of my other rules that I don't follow pretty much is to not read comments, but I do read comments in the end. And then people tell me like, oh, you know, you're really fat. And I'm like, well, whatever.
But one of the things moving on, but still focusing on the internet, that I find really interesting is the left-right paradigm, where people used to say, I'm left, I'm right. Well, because everything has become niche due to the internet, what you see is political movements becoming fractured and fragmented. And at first it happened with the left, where I originally was on the left and then I saw wokeism and we all know what happened with that. But now I'm seeing on the right and the fractures start to appear on the right. So what do you think of that, what's happening on the right, and where do you place yourself?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, if you asked me that maybe a year or two ago, I'd probably have like a a name for the place where I place myself. But now I'm not so sure, just because I'm kind of in the more kind of dissident right-wing space, and I kind of know the different factions now, and it does feel like the fracturing is more of a product of what's going on with the medium itself, like with the internet itself, and the incentives that are set by the platforms. Because obviously, what are these movements? They have a few key influencers, some of them, and they kind of set policy for the movements. And to grow your specific circle, you kind of have to cleave off audience from the other circles. And then you enter into these beefs for whatever point of doctrine. There's beef around, should we be a wife guy, or is, women loving women and having a peaceful home with them gay, or something like that.
What a conversation.
This is an important conversation on the right. Obviously, there's a split between religious and atheist right-wingers, or people who are like maybe more into like a pagan vibes and things like that. That's a big fault line. So, that's kind of, and obviously the influencers in these spaces, especially because now there's more attention to these spaces, because there really is a lot of generative, interesting stuff happening there. That's why I'm in this space. They're getting a lot of attention. There's a bit of money. Actually, people are getting whatever sign-ups and whatever Substack money, and yeah, there's more incentive to present yourself as the actual heir of the right wing in general, and this is the program, and my 10-point program is much more coherent than your 10-point program. And yeah, people fighting over immigration. Like there's the major fault line now is between people who are kind of Christian, and they essentially are looking forward to a right wing with kind of a Christian core as kind of the morality of whatever proposed state that they'd like to live in, and people who say, oh no, Christianity essentially just means open borders, because you just let in anyone in the world who's Christian, and that obviously has a lot of bad side effects in the sense that we're just pretty much at square one, and we have the same social ills that we have now, but everyone's nominally Christian. So yeah. I mean, that's kind of the main divide here, and there is something to these arguments. Obviously, they need to be discussed, but the fact that they end up, in the sense that okay, we need to purge you, we need to cleave you off, and whoever is with me has to stay on this side of the fence, and whoever is not with me needs to leave. It's it's definitely it's a interesting and lively time to be in right-wing politics on the internet. But yeah, it's still I think one of the most interesting places to hang out.
And you identify as being, to quote your words, a dissident right. What does that actually mean? What do you believe?
It's just a moniker for the whole space. I mean, what do I believe? I mean, I don't think I'd say I have like a political program to implement tomorrow, but I'm more of a kind of a suspicious of mainstream right politics. I mean, I share the same values. I mean, I think we should have a society that has kind of a relatively core normative ideas of how to live life. The two-parent family type situation, and that policy should be geared towards supporting that. And we should be having a kind of a long-term consideration of what our societies will look like, which brings in the kind of the birth rates conversation and all of this stuff. I think religion should have a kind of a revered position in society, though my personal relationship with religion is a little bit tortured, and I know, but yeah, I think I'm kind of right-wing in the sense of, yes, my values align with pretty much, I would say, most right-wing people who would consider themselves right-wing. What the dissident right brings to the table is kind of a more granular critique of power. Like, a lot of people in the dissident right wouldn't say that, okay, we just need to win the next election, because I think the main epiphany that they've had is post-Trump, post-Brexit, is that things just don't work that way. It's not like you win an election and you have power, and your side has power, and now you do your side's things. We discovered that, there is a whole substructure, kind of managerial substructure, you call it the blob, call it the cathedral, call it whatever you'd like, that essentially has a mind of its own, and it is fueled by status. It's fueled by what the elite, the actual elite who is in power, not the figurehead guy who you voted in or out, and what they believe, and what fuels them and what interests them. And for now, the major kind of ideology behind the elite is some form of wokeness. The most interesting and powerful people in the world believe some form of wokeness, either because they are true believers, which I think most of them are, or because it is useful to them, because it has some useful characteristics for the upper class, because they can essentially have kind of this very profound moral vision where they can not only feel good about themselves for flagellating themselves because whatever white guilt and all this type of stuff. They can hate the people that they usually hate, which is kind of the middle and lower middle class. And then they can also kind of virtuously give handouts to their client classes, which are the lower classes, people, immigrants, all the woke coalition, the woke pyramid that you want to, obviously they don't mingle with these people, but they are their client class and they can make promises to them and they can gang up on the middle, obviously, because the middle is always the contender for the top spot. You're not worried about, the people in Newham. You're worried about the people in Cornwall. And you don't want those to come and get you. So, yeah, it's. So,
Alex, that being the case, if winning elections doesn't solve things, what is the dissidents' right version of the solution?
There are many solutions. That's always kind of where the thing breaks down a little bit, because the solutions are typically a more centralized form of organizing society. I mean,
there's a relief.
Yeah.
Authoritarianism, great.
I mean, you call it authoritarianism, but democracy is something is quite recent in human history. I mean, we've had some form of monarchy pretty much since time immemorial. There's always kind of, that's kind of the hierarchy. You have middle management, upper management. At the top, there's a CEO in any organization that's functional. Except for the state, where apparently we're all kind of co-partners and we're all CEOs in our own right. But in reality, that's not really how it works. So I think that the main critique isn't that democracy on paper is bad. Is that democracy in reality is essentially a shadow oligarchy. It's like, it's not that, it wouldn't be good for it to be this way where, we have these really relevant people who actually have power in government that we can all vote for in an informed way. And, this all sounds great. I buy into it. But witnessing the process of politics, how the sausage is made in reality, what you have is essentially a whole cast of people who you cannot see, who are unaccountable, who are distributed within this whole kind of hydra of managerialism. And, like with COVID, like who exactly, has been held to account for the fact that most probably this stuff escaped the lab. Most probably a lot of the policies were completely misguided. Like an extreme amount of, a lot of people died because of the policies. I mean, because of issues with policies around the hospitals. There's absolutely no accountability for this stuff. There won't be a Nuremberg trial for COVID because there are no figureheads. You can shoot Himmler. You can, it's clear because he was obviously in charge of his division. He had his middle management. He had all the people under him. You can, French Revolution style, kill the king because you know who he is and he's responsible for X or Y. So I think that's kind of the idea. It's like, okay, if you want to have any sort of functional organization, you need to have a chain of command, and you need to know who the guy at the top is, because when you go out to have your little French Revolution to oust him, at least you know who he is, and that's it. And it sounds
There'll
really.
be a lot of people who would happily hang Matt Hancock from the gallows down the road from here. I promise you. Sorry, mate.
No, but isn't that the problem with every type of government? Every type of government. Konstantin is obviously from Russia. You had the figurehead, the leader, but you also had the shadowy bureaucrats. Ceausescu is the same thing. My mum's from Venezuela, Maduro, I would happily kill, right? But he's also got his cronies, none of whom that I know. So isn't that the problem with all government, Alex?
Yeah, in a way it is. I mean, I think it's a problem of scale as well. And it's a problem of, the fact that a lot of the managerial system that we have now in government, it really is kind of necessary. Like, back in the day, you didn't have like FDA, EPA type organizations, which, people might, not think they're extremely effective, but you kind of need them now because the complexity of the whole system really is like incredible. You need to have consumer protection, you need to have all these types of things. So it really is hard to see who's in charge of these things. So yeah, I think there is an issue with that. But I mean, with Ceausescu, we did shoot the guy, and then things did change. I mean, slowly and
It's a bit
steadily,
unfair.
but-
He had like a 99% approval rating.
You did.
Yeah,
The
we
day
did,
before you were set.
Yeah, it tells you a lot about democracy, doesn't it?
Well, it's not really a democracy. Oh, I just dropped my mic pen.
Yeah, well, it's not a democracy when you don't like it, is it?
Yeah.
When you don't like the result.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I think a lot of people on dissident right would say that, our democracy might be closer to that than you think, to the figurehead type.
So what's the solution then, as I fiddle my microphone back in my pocket?
The solution, I mean, like I said, there's different proposals. I'm not sure that I've, buy any of them in like wholesale. But the idea would be, a lot of people are interested in kind of more decentralized ways of organizing society, like, like charter cities and stuff, where it's kind of much easier to have kind of a CEO figure at the top, where it's, small. You essentially buy into this community, and then you also have exit rights. So you don't necessarily have voice where you vote for the guy, but it's like, it's whatever, Konstantin's charter city, he's the boss here. I kind of like what he's doing with the place. And then I apply to get in, Konstantin says, you're nice, okay, you can stay here. And if, it hits the fan, you can have exit rights.
How many wives am I allowed to have in this? Because that's really
I don't know. It's your charter city, Konstantin.
You know what?
You have to decide.
I am now part of the dissident right, because this sounds great. I strictly
this
won,
is just
by
one
the strictly
flavor
won,
of the
by
solution.
the way.
Yeah, I mean.
But this is kind of the American model. We saw this particularly during COVID. A lot of our friends moved around the United States.
I think it's a good model.
Yeah. I am envious as hell. You do need a big country to do it, and a federalist system.
Or multiple countries.
Or multiple countries, right, exactly. But that is actually what happened, is people are sorting themselves based on their preferences about how they want to see the relationship between welfare and government and taxes and freedoms and opportunity and so on. And so you see those more liberty-minded people moving to places like Texas, like Florida, and there are plenty of people in California. I was just in California a few weeks ago. There are lots of people, there's this narrative of like everyone is leaving LA. There are lots of people who are really happy living in LA, and they're staying because they are comfortable with the trade-offs that they have.
Of course.
Even they don't like the machete attacks. But as they told me, they have an app now.
Yeah, of course.
They have an app. So if
Machete
you
Swerve.
Yeah,
of
something
course.
like, well, right. Is that what it's called?
No.
It's a hell of a name. We should set that up here, mate.
You came up with that straight away. But this is literally a conversation I had with somebody. I was like, they were asking me about, we see all these knife attacks in London. And I was like, oh yeah, I was just watching a video of some guy with a machete. And they were like, oh yeah, we have that here. But we have an app. We put it in, and then everyone knows to stay away from that area for a couple of hours.
There's a way in which these things kind of self-segregate at one point. You
Right.
know, it's like, we're talking about white flight and stuff like that. It's, you could call it kind of Brazilification, where you have the high rises next to the favelas, and there's a really, really functional wall between them. And then, people live relatively peacefully. There's some issues between them, but yeah, that seems to be kind of the equilibrium that these cities reach. You have the kind of the donut cities model, where the inner city is just completely deserted, and then the suburbs are flourishing, and then you have kind of the commuter towns around, and then people swerve each other, swerving the machetes.
So it's essentially a future in which people start to build their communities according to their value systems.
I think that's probably most likely. I think kind of see a lot of people doing that already in practice or aspiring to do it. There's not really, you kind of have to coordinate around something. I mean, obviously I'd love that something to be like the nation state and stuff like that, but it might just be the case that, the nation state was a social technology for a different era where, nations were at war with each other, and you kind of had nations representing relatively homogenous ethnicities, not just like, economic zones. So now I think it might be that, okay, people will arrange themselves after maybe religion, maybe whatever, they're transhumanist AI devotees, and you want to, I don't know, whatever, have...
Well, some set of values, like, for example, we are here at NatCon. Neither Francis or I are particularly conservative or nationalistic, really.
We welcome you.
Well, but this is my point exactly. This is my point exactly, which is that there is overlap in terms of values between different groups of people. I wrote a piece on my Substack after we came back from America about the old school liberals in America and conservatives trying to work out a way to work together on things that they actually agree on. And that's kind of maybe what you're talking about. And I have to say, I joked about being part of the dissident right, but I genuinely think that In Britain, it's unlikely because we're too small a country. But in America, I totally see that happening. And everyone I talk to about their experience of doing that, they seem really happy. They seem really happy. You know, like Rogan was like, oh, move to Texas is great. And there are people in Florida who are delighted to be there. Like I said, there's people in New York. They love being in New York, and it's the value system that works for them. I'll be thinking about this.
Yeah, I think it seems to be like a natural way that things are kind of panning out. You know, there's a lot of talk about kind of theoretical ideas in these spaces, like, you know, the integralist state. Everything's going to be Catholic. No, it's not. This is going to be very hard to. It's definitely a toothpaste that has left the tube a very long time ago. Not putting that back in. So yeah, you know, in theory, a lot of things are possible. I think in reality, something like this is more likely. I mean, you have this as well in Orania, you know, in South Africa, it's kind of a relatively famous thing where, you know, you have the Afrikaners having trouble with the surrounding issues politically. They essentially, you know, made their own city, and there's very strict rules of what you can do. It's not like it's, you know, it's not walled off, but it's very clearly enforced what's allowed in there and what not. A lot of people have problems with this because it's, you know, it's for the Dutch ethnics of the country, and obviously it's very monochromatic in Orania. But it's one way of solving their problems. So it's a highly functional society in a sea of absolute chaos, and that's, you know, one way. It's like a very you know, and the anti-favela. So
I mean, the problem is with that is if it's done on racial lines, I'm kind of not down with it.
I mean, they're down with it. That's the thing.
I mean,
it's a functional society.
But so was apartheid. You know what I mean?
I mean, it's not apartheid in the sense that, you know, this is literally just private property. It's like a reservation. It's like if the, you know, Indians in America would say, okay, we just buy this plot of land and we live there, which is essentially what they're doing now. But it's just because it's endorsed by the state. Yeah. But here it's not endorsed by the state. It's just these people know each other. They have private property, and they have so much of it that it's essentially a town. And, you know, if you're at least a little bit libertarian, you say, okay, that's, you know, pretty much fair enough.
Well, I have no problem.
If they can't come into your house, why should they come into their compound?
Right. I have no problem with people, you know, wanting to, you know, have shared ideals and all the rest of it. I'm deeply uncomfortable when it comes to the racial aspect of it, where people just go, right, we are X group of people.
I understand that, obviously, but in that, you know, I think in a situation like this, where you're essentially at war, this is, you know, whatever you think about, there's a lot of violence happening in South Africa.
Agreed.
The racial aspect for the people living in Orania is a good rule of thumb. You know, if your family's in danger, and if that's kind of the thing, it's not that people of different ethnicities can't come in around. Like literally, there is, but they have a police force, so no like deviation from, you know, law and order will be tolerated. You literally will be taken off the premises if you start, you know, mucking about.
Yeah.
So you know, it's, you know, there's a limit to tolerance sometimes.
I agree. There's a limit to tolerance when it comes to things like crime. The thing where it loses me is if it's done on pure... If you're essentially creating a mini ethno-state.
I think they're creating a mini ethno-state in practice, and not necessarily because that's, you know, that's the ethos of it, but it's like, you know, it is for their community, and they happen to all be Dutch ethnics, or, you know, from Afrikaners, essentially. And I think, you know, they do this for a reason, because not doing this has been, you know, quite fatal for a lot of them. So, you know, I'm all for freedom of association, independent of what criterion you're basing it on.
So, would you accept that in other nations?
Yeah, why not? I mean, it's just, you know, you buy a plot of land in Venezuela and populate it with your very best friends, you know, and then you have so much money to buy a really big plot of land. Is it discriminatory that other people can't come trespass?
It's not as if you're building a society and you're saying that this group of people aren't welcome because they have these type of immutable characteristics, I would say that there's a real problem with that.
And you would outlaw it. I mean, what's the limit there? Is it if there's a post office, then it's bad, but if there's none, then it's just like your backyard. You know, it's I really do think that people should have the freedom to do that. Obviously, you know, this is a question of taste, and I think it's also a question of the conditions you happen to find yourself in. and what you've had to tolerate up to that point, and it's it's a tough place to live in. And the problem is like the Afrikaners really don't really have anywhere else to go. It's not like they can go back to Holland. It's like the only place that they can live. And I've had people on my show who are Afrikaners from South Africa. They're working politically to better their country. But the things that they describe to me, a lot of people like in Cape Town and stuff have bars on their doors, and they're literally called rape bars for a reason, things like that. So there's a lot of like profound ethnic conflict, which happens along the white-black divide. And it's obviously you want to give people the benefit of the doubt. And a lot of these guys that I've talked to also have a lot of black friends. It's impossible not to do in South Africa. But, there's a reticence around these things for a reason. And, I think it can be reasonable in some ways.
And Alex, we've talked about a whole variety of subjects. The dissident right thing is an interesting one, because I see you kind of dipping into that, and as I watch what you talk about and stuff, and I've always just been curious to hear your views on it. We've got a little bit of time left. What else are you thinking about?
What else am I thinking about? Well,
other than the babies.
Other than the babies, I think everyone's babied out. The subject of my talk, this NatCon, was a little bit more, I guess, more spicy, but also it kind of flew under the radar because people don't really, they shouldn't engage with it as much. It's essentially something that ties into what we were discussing as well. It's it's around the concept of equality. We have this aspiration towards equality, and I think it's very virtuous. We want that. We have kind of an instinct for fairness. We want people to engage with societies to their fullest and have as much opportunity as possible. But I feel we kind of constantly hit a snag, especially people who are of kind of more the classical liberal persuasion, and they really do want, we talk a lot about equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. We classical liberals are for equality of opportunity, while they are for equality of outcome. And I feel like for people who are more conservative or want maybe to implement a more conservative vision of society, this is a bit of a trap, because if you say, okay, I'm for equality of opportunity and I want everyone to have equal opportunities, it's a very hard thing to prove politically in terms, like, for example, if you implement a policy, okay, I want to say everyone in the society has maximum opportunity, we're doing the best we can so that everyone can, equalize opportunities. And if after 1, 2, 3, 4 generations that doesn't happen, and you have pretty much the same distribution of people ending up at the top from different constituencies, I'm saying this is kind of a multi-ethnic, men and women are, theoretically have equality of opportunity, and you realize you have the same patterns. What you get is an extremely powerful left, because essentially what they're holding you to is equality of outcome. Because there's no test for equality of opportunity in the wild, but equality of outcome. If you don't get equality of outcome after, the set timer, you're going to be suspected of racism, sexism, homophobia, all this type of stuff.
Well, it's even worse than that, because on many of these criteria, we are actually there is equality of outcome across these groups, and it's still not enough.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's the ideology of this stuff kind of takes on a mind of its own after a while. It's it's the equalization, and kind of it becomes a bit of a religious impulse. Not only do we need to equalize these people, we need to uplift them and right historical injustice by penalizing the oppressor class. The people who are who are at the top. So we're kind of in that phase of it as well at this point. I feel like my speech was more in the sense that we need to be a little bit more realistic about what is actually possible as the right. We keep getting into we're stuck in the mud in the same equality of outcome discussion, equality of opportunity discussion, and everyone's like, you also have to kind of realize that equality of opportunity, even if you were to try your hardest at it, is pretty much impossible in practice as well, because people come to the table with, extremely different backgrounds, even putting aside genetics, I mean, the cultural aspects, what nutrition they have in childhood,
right.
How much can you change that? And I think it's just a losing game. And I feel like the right should be in the business of offering like functionality, offering wide-ranging opportunity, but in the sense of, okay, like colorblindness, you know.
Well, this is what I've always said, is like, I really reject any sort of messing around with quotas and any of that. What we should have is no discrimination based on prejudice, right? You eliminate that, and then it's every man for himself at that point.
It's a tough one, because, you know, in law now you have essentially the standard of disparate impact. And you have that in the UK as well under the Equality Act, and in the US under the Civil Rights Act, where it's pretty tough to prove that you were prejudiced or not. And the way people prove that there was prejudice is by seeing the outcomes. So if you don't have proportional representation in expositions, people would say, okay, this is discriminatory, you know, because it really is in practice pretty tough to say, okay, why did you take this candidate instead of this one? Well, you might say, oh, they had a better university education, but no, but they have more experience here. So it kind of opens you up to litigation now, and pretty much everywhere in the West. So this is something that I think, as a right, needs to be walked back, because it's an impossible standard, and it's like a cudgel. It's a rod for our own back. I do not recommend, and I know it's counterintuitive, because people really want to have equality. It's instinctive. We want fairness, but fairness needs to play out in a different way. And you can see this, especially, I mean, I'm sorry to say, with crime as well. I mean, you have rampant crime in the US especially, and a little bit here in the UK as well. And there's a lot of issues with policing along racial lines. There's a lot of issues with not, you know, rocking the boat with different communities, which we've seen with the grooming gang scandal. You know, from a right-wing perspective, what you need to have in regards to crime is pretty strict and clear implementation of law and order, independent of how disparate the outcomes are. And I mean that the outcomes will be disparate because they've always been disparate, you know, and there are all sorts of factors that flow into here as well, you know, cultural factors, crack epidemic, whatever, fatherlessness, which are factors as well, but they're also extremely hard to remedy and say, oh, we're just going to change the culture. It's like, we're just going to say, okay, you have to treat your children like Koreans treat their children, and that's going to right things. That doesn't really happen. It's not how things happen. It's much more organic. So we need to, unfortunately, treat the symptoms to protect the citizens from this, because a lot of people forget that the cost of crime is not just the fact that the poor guy ends up in jail, because that's what we focus on. It's, you know, the absolutely ruined lives of the communities that have to live with these people. And a lot of the sources of the most crime in the world is recidivism. Like, people who are in and out of jail are not deterred by short jail sentences. I think like something like a 3 strikes law or something like that is genius, because it really is a very small percentage of the population that does most of the crime, and that also destabilizes most of the areas where crime happens, because there is a kind of a domino effect in crime as well. It's like, if you are in the crime-ridden area and there's a lot of crime, well, you know, crime is the way you make your money, you know, gangs and things like that. So yeah, I think that's, this is a fruitful and effective area of the right. I mean, you could see this with Giuliani's policies, and, you know, after the crack epidemic, you know, things went well for a while because it was pretty strict and draconian, and, you know, people didn't like it because it affected certain communities more than others. It's gonna, because this is just how it is.
There you go. Well, Alex, thank you for coming back on the show. We're going to ask you some questions from our local supporters in a second, but everyone should check out your Subversive podcast, and we'll see you on Locals right now.